My guest today is Sue Mbaya, and she is the founder and director of Menopause Solutions Africa and host of the Pause for Menopause podcast. She's leading menopause awareness in Africa and seeking to normalize the change while empowering women. She has over 20 years of policy advocacy, advisory, and development experience at national, regional, and global levels, with a focus on African states and the African Union. Her work and influence in the area of menopause have been recognized globally, with Sue often being referred to as the voice of menopause in Africa. I am delighted to welcome you here today, Sue. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Rachel. It's wonderful to be here. And I always have to say to people, it's okay to refer to me as the voice of menopause in Africa, as long as you don't refer to me as the look of menopause in Africa. It's great to be here.
I'm so delighted, and I'm just going to confess, we've had a few technical issues because you're currently in Ethiopia, aren't you? You're moving soon, but you're currently in Ethiopia. And we've had a few internet issues this morning, but we're trying another solution, and we're there because we feel you have to talk about menopause, and I want to be able to share your message about what's going on for menopause in Africa. So here we are again. So let's start. I'm so sorry you're going to have to repeat yourself. How did you come to be so involved and passionate about menopause?
Well, I wish my story was different, but I'm just exactly one of those women who was minding her business, going about her work, and suddenly was hit by a storm, and that storm turned out to be menopause. So I was at a time, an incredible time of my life. Very, very busy. Had a hysterectomy years before, and I'd been advised that as long as my ovaries were not touched, I would be fine, and I'd be fine. Didn't know what that meant. It turned out not to be the case. So having had a hysterectomy, I didn't have the increasingly erratic menstrual cycle to warn me that something was amiss. So I didn't know until one day I was just really struggling, and I was, you can see my facial expression is a real indication of how my life was feeling. It was like everything was just upside down. I had headaches, I was anxious, I was not coping, with my very, very busy life. And then please don't laugh at me, but I always say it was like in the recesses of my brain, decided, let me Google hot flashes. Because it felt like that's what it was. And I'd heard that word before at some point. So I Googled and I thought, what do they look like? What do they feel like? Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. Why do people get hot flashes? Menopause. And so, yeah, that was my introduction, to the world of menopause. And so, because what then happened over the next few years was just so disconcerting, so destabilizing, so isolating, I determined that I would make sure, because I'm a fixer, right? I'm a fixer in life. I determined I would make sure that my counterparts didn't go through the same experience, that they would be prepared, that they would know what was coming. And at that point, I wasn't even thinking of, thriving through menopause and, getting, I just thought, know what's coming. You need to know what's coming, so that's how I got started.
It's crazy, isn't it? I think it's all over the world. We just don't have the information. We don't know what is coming down the line. And if we did, I think it would be easier. I think it'd still be challenging, but it would be easier because we wouldn't, you wouldn't immediately think you've got dementia or, why have you got anxiety? Is your personality changing? Or, there's so many things, but you had a lot going on.
Well, yeah, you know what? It was a busy time. So I was career-wise was straddled across three different career lines. So I was flying. I was flying high. I was thriving. I was having a great time. I was busy, but I was having a great time. And at that time, my mother, whose health had been ailing, turned a corner, and it became clear that, in fact, we thought we were losing her at that time. It became clear that I would have to change my lifestyle to become a primary carer, for her. And I bit the bullet. And then I lost my sister in that year, my young sister, much younger than I, which was devastating. And I decided to adopt her boy, who was 8 years old at the time. And at exactly the same time, my son, who was my firstborn son, who was studying in the US, just went through a dramatic turn in his life and just was just so messed up. And I'm glad to say he's doing extremely well now. But at the time, it felt like it was the end of his life and mine. I mean, this is my son, you know. So it was just a time where it was, you know, I was at a confluence of just so many different things. And then I had another move, country and job move at the same time. So it was 2 years of being in a perfect storm. And it was in that time that I entered perimenopause. And it was probably because of the extraordinarily high stress, crushing stress, you know, that I probably was precipitated or catapulted into perimenopause.
I would say no wonder you had the issues you had. My goodness me, you had so much to deal with. And I think
But
this
hey,
is what we forget though, isn't it? Because we don't have the knowledge, we don't know the impact of the stress and what it's going to do to us. And menopause is such a sensitive time in our lives.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. My
yeah.
goodness me. Well, are you feeling better now?
Well, I mean, one would probably have to join the dots, you know, when we say better, you know, what went on, right? So I started off with these headaches, horrible headaches, and a lot of anxiety. I've never been an anxious person. You know, I'm one of your, you know, mind over matter, didn't need pain relief to have babies, you know, just power through, pioneering, you know, that kind of person. Never been anxious. You know, once I, you know, entered perimenopause, I really struggled with um, not so much hot flashes during the day. I had the hot flashes, a lot of anxiety, some hot flashes, but the night sweats were crushing. You know, I was up all the time. And then, of course, at the same time, I had bladder issues. So I was either waking up to go to the toilet several times in the same night or waking up several times with night sweats. And there was no kindness. It wasn't like one night it was night sweats and then next night it was, you know, going to the toilet. It was both in the same night. So, you know, so 4 or 5 times I'd be waking up. It was ridiculous. And so imagine the sleep deprivation and then waking up into, you know, to try and do my 3 jobs. And so that was really, really difficult. I then had incredible weight loss. At the time, I didn't know about low testosterone and, you know, menopause, losing your menopause protection, your estrogen protection. I just lost weight and everybody was looking at me like, are you okay? I was skeletal, literally. So I guess high cortisol, loss of muscle, you know, mass. And I thought, okay, so by this point, I knew that I was in perimenopause and it was really confusing because you're supposed to put on weight, not lose weight.
Yeah,
Nobody
I'd love to be losing weight.
didn't last very long. Hang on. It didn't last very long
Yeah.
because after that crushing weight loss, the pounds started to come on, you know, thereafter. So I went from this to that. And then couldn't keep it off and it just kept on coming. So after a while, years later now, I then found out that I had insulin resistance. And so there was the body's not recognizing its insulin. So it keeps on putting more and more and more. And so the weight gain. I also ended up with very, very high cholesterol. It was just this huge spike. And yeah, you know, being, you know, in a, you know, danger zone. But before I got to the cholesterol, you know, issues, I found that the brain fog was horrible. And I think that it's as much as about what was going on in my brain, you know, with the estrogen loss as the sleep deprivation. I mean, you don't have to be going through menopause to suffer cognitive, challenges because of sleep deprivation. So that happened to me, you know, quite a lot. So I was living in this country that I've come to, beautiful Ethiopia. I love this country. I've been really, really blessed to be in this country, but it was very, very challenging because I just moved here and I was learning about menopause. I was learning about what coping, mechanisms you could take. But a lot of the solutions that were being suggested on the internet as I was reading, admittedly, most of the stuff from Western context was not available to me in Ethiopia. And so, for instance, I had gone back to South Africa, which is my original place of origin, and my doctor said, well, yes, you're there. How much time do you have here? And I said, well, I'm leaving tomorrow. And she said, okay, I'm going to give you this HRT solution, but promise me you will not start using it until you've had a mammogram. These patches are great, but if there is any hint, of cancerous cells, this will be like fertilizer. So promise me you won't start using these patches until. So I said, yes, went back to Ethiopia, got the patches, went to Ethiopia, procrastinated because I was just so busy to get this mammogram, just kept on meaning to. And in the meantime, the patches are in the fridge. So eventually I got the mammogram and it said that everything's fine. No lumps, no nothing. I thought, great. Procrastinated a couple more months because I had to read about the patches. I had to fully understand before I started taking. Eventually, I get round to it, open the pack, read the thing. Okay, that's what I have to do. These are the side effects. This is what you look out for. Great. Oh, wait, they expired.
Oh, no.
So because I took so long to get around. Anyway, because, being a responsible person, didn't take them, didn't start using them because it's expired medication. Went back to South Africa for a visit, and the doctor said, how long are you here? I said, I'm here for 10 days. Said, mammogram. So I said, I had a mammogram. It's clear. And she said, mammogram. Well, it turned out the technology has moved so much that they were able to pick up 2 lumps, in my breast, which weren't picked up with the other technology, which is so old. So procrastination helped me in that case. So, but this is just an example, Rachel, of what a woman who's in a Southern context can go through. The other example was, vaginal dryness. I really struggled with that. And it says on the internet, thank you, go to the chemist and get a vaginal lubricant. Not accessible. Can't just walk into a chemist and get a normal lubricant. So, I struggled because I was having these bladder issues. I was having this night sweats and so on. And I had, fortunately, had a double life, and I was with this every 6 months. I go to another country and was able to get, herbal supplements and so on. And I couldn't now use the HRT because we found these little lumps and we had to wait it out to see, that it was okay. In the meantime, it was during that time now when the doctors were now saying, this is nonsense. You can't just, we need to put you through the whole gamut, of tests. We discovered that I now had osteoporosis, osteopenia in some of my joints and osteoporosis in the other joints. It made me really, really sad that in the years, in the couple of years prior, that I'd been powering through and saying, persevere, you can do this. I didn't know what the loss of the estrogen protection would do to me physiologically. So I did end up, on HRT eventually because my symptoms were so severe, and so we get to your question, how am I feeling now? I think I'm on top of many of the symptoms. I'm a woman of faith. I'm a praying woman. I pray through most things, and mind over matter, all of those. And it actually felt as though I had let myself, and I'd let the side down by ultimately taking the HRT, because I think that there is a narrative and there's a school of thought in which I do subscribe to the school of thought that says, if you can use food supplements, herbal remedies, why not? But I think with HRT, what I was hearing was a little bit more pointed than why not try the herbal remedies? It was like, if you do HRT, your faith is not strong enough, or you let the side down. So I think psychologically I went through a lot. First of all, I had to wait out these little lumps, for I think 9 months before we could 6 months. So I had two rounds of 6 months, mammograms to see. So I had to wait out for a year, using supplements which helped with my symptoms, but didn't allow me to be completely on top of the symptoms. And then I had to accept that I would have to move on to HRT, and then feeling like I defiled myself, by taking, the hormonal replacement. So I had this mix of the symptoms of menopause and then the psychological, impact of what we say to each other as women, at the same time. So here we are.
Well, your daft thing for feeling bad about taking the HRT, that was just silly. That was just, if you needed it, which you clearly did,
yes,
then it was the right thing for you. But so difficult. You had all that process with the mammograms and everything else, and having to go between countries. I think this is really interesting because, it gives context. A, is the HRT available? B, what hoops do you need to go through to get it? Is it sustainable? So is it there long term? You might have been able to get it one time, but you might not be able to get it in the future. So yes, my goodness me, you had a very complicated set of circumstances, didn't you?
But I'm really, really quite privileged, aren't I, that I am in that 1 to 5%, a band of women in Africa who can access HRT. Yeah. Right. So in most cases, in most contexts on the continent, it's not even a conversation, of whether or not you should take it because you can't access it. I mean, for heaven's sake, I'm still not able to walk into a chemist here and get a vaginal lubricant. I cannot access HRT in this country that I live in because you can't import it. It's not scheduled so that it can be imported. The country is going through so many other things that what foreign currency is available is reserved, for life-saving medications, and menopause and vaginal dryness are not considered to be life-saving. I mean, I wanted to keep, my intimate relationship alive. So, I would beg to differ. But and this is what we struggle with. So, and I love your material. I love your thinking. And I ascribe very much to the idea of thriving through menopause. You talk about the magnificent midlife. I talk about thriving through menopause. But there are a few things that we have to take care of before we can thrive through menopause, in this part of the world. So, in my part of the world, we know that we're still dealing with the impacts of patriarchy. People say to me, oh, in Africa, when you hit menopause, now you can sit with the Council of Elders, you can do all of this. And I'm like, how many women is that? How many women, or even men for that matter, get to sit on a council of elders? And so it says, well, then you don't have to worry about that. Then you can now participate in initiation ceremonies. And I just say, let's be careful. I don't know why we should celebrate just being let out of a cage. We should smash the cage altogether. There shouldn't be. Yes, a woman should sit on a council of elders because she's been shown to be wise and of value to the tribe, not because she's now grey-haired and is no longer menstruating.
A threat to young men. Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of things that we have to think about before we can thrive through menopause. In Africa, our menopause is not prioritized. The flourishing, amount of data, information, platforms that you have in the UK, in Australia, and in Canada are just not yet there here in Africa. Our doctors still get an average of 2 hours of lectures on menopause as they go through med school. Our policies don't reflect the need to prioritize the well-being of a midlife woman. Once you've had your children, the next time we'll talk to you is when you have, cancer of the cervix or something like that. So we're not prioritizing a woman in her midlife in terms of preventive medicine that will help her to thrive. We have some things to do, and so Rachel, that's why I do what I do. We're seeing some exciting areas of progress in Kenya, in South Africa, and elsewhere where there are, brown women, India. We're seeing that the drive to do research so that our menopause response is based on more relevant data. It's starting to take off now, but oh my goodness, trying to make money available, for that research, so we still have a way to go before we can say that we are thriving through menopause on the continent.
And I know you're reluctant to speak for Africa, the continent, but I know you've spent time in a lot of countries, haven't you? You've worked in a lot of countries, you've lived in a lot of countries. So I think that does give you some gravitas and authority to talk about, the different countries. If you can't see the video, Sue is holding up her fingers to show it's a tiny amount. Well, no, I don't think so. I think you do have that. And so I'm interested to know, where are the differences? Where are the differences both in terms of appreciation, knowledge, sentiment towards menopause, but also those things with regard to women getting older in general?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's important, to just, bemoan the fact that many of the things that we associate with traditional African cultures are being lost, because cultures, they evolve, but also modernization erodes, cultures, right? So there were some things that were built into our cultures that were helpful, for women going through menopause to cope, or to safety nets and so on, which we don't have anymore. So the first one is, around us being Africans largely being oratory or having oral, it's transmittal of their cultures and information. And here I am. My mother didn't talk to me about menopause. My sisters didn't talk to me about menopause. And many of my peers say that their mothers and their grandmothers didn't talk to them about menopause. In the same way, some of that reverence that used to be, ascribed to women as they grow older, where we were really respected for the knowledge, that we would bring. And so that would ameliorate the kind of like, oh, you're old, which we experience now. That's fading because, there's a lot of, importing of, Western ideals, migration out. So actually, most women, in there are many studies now in Africa that look at the need for care for aging women because of just the breakdown of the culture and the cohesion of the social infrastructure. So it's a different world, right? It's a different world. So that knowledge and the prominence that you might have received, as a woman, and it would never be the same, right, as that which a man receives, because men will forever be celebrated for being wise in their gray hairs, but not necessarily women, right? Because we still have those vestiges. So I think that's one thing that we bemoan. On the other side, we also bemoan the fact that while many African cultures had the provision for a man to take on additional wives or an additional wife not because it was a polygamous situation, but because his wife was no longer able to bear him children. Take note of the terminology, right? So he would be allowed to get a younger version, of her. And in some cultures like my own, I would be allowed to bring my niece to now become the wife, to my husband. And why would I be allowed to do that? I think they thought that would be doing me a favor, because at least if it's my relative, we're not going to fight, as much. You see what I'm saying? What that's translated to is just a wholesale, really disregard and disrespect for women by their male, their spouses at the time that they start to struggle. And so it's almost like it's a license, to move on to the next one or two or three, when, the vaginal dryness sets in and so on. So we still see that there is a concern there, and there is a difference, in cultures, and there's a difference in modern, urban contexts and rural contexts. In the urban contexts, you tend to have a little bit more information now about, menopause. My husband and I, talk together, about menopause. We have access to to information. We're trying to walk it out, and to figure it out together. But women in rural contexts just have less information, and so the myths around menopause continue to persist more in rural contexts where the information is less. Hey, listen, you've got myths about menopause everywhere. My podcast, Pause for Menopause, a podcast in October last year, my contribution to International, Menopause Day was I did a boot camp, on menopause, for, every day for 14 days. I did 10 minutes on a topic, and just like, really just this really fast pace with a challenge at the end. And one of the episodes that I did there was looking at myths. And I was not talking to women in the village. I was talking about myths that are modern day for you and I, that persist. So, but there is that inequity where, women who have access, to more information, tend to be, a little bit more privileged. I also think that, and I've already talked about more developed contexts, access to medication, and medical products is important. One of the most staggering statistics that I've ever heard from my guest on my podcast was a gynecologist from Kenya who said to me, in Kenya, which is doing better than other countries in Africa, they have one gynecologist for every 100,000 women. And that's one gynecologist for every 100,000 women. And that only 10% of women in Kenya will ever see a gynecologist throughout their lifetime, including childbearing years. So, and you would think that your gynae is the person who you are seeing very, very often, who helps you. So again, that difference, that disparity in access to healthcare professionals, means that women have different levels of care and help that they can get. So I don't talk about doctors, I don't talk about your physician, because having gone through the physiological impacts of menopause, my best friend was actually not my gynae even, it was my physician. And I've got a gynae who's like a physician, so I'm really blessed that I had the two. But most women across the continent, I mean, a drop of us ever get to see a gynecologist and have access to a physician. So some of these complex interactions in the symptoms of menopause, just your healthcare provider, who is a nurse, who is a midwife, with the most basic qualifications, is just not able to bring them together. They wouldn't know that, I'm suffering from insulin resistance, or that the spike, in cholesterol is associated in any way with menopause. I wouldn't get a mammogram. I would not be able to get screening to tell me that, I now have osteoporosis until I fall and I, bust my hip. So these are some of the the concerns that we're seeing, across, the continent.
Yeah, there's obviously, I mean, we talk about divides in information here, but I mean, really, everybody can access the same services. They talk about a postcode lottery in terms of hormone therapy access here in the UK, but there's nothing like, I mean, it's a completely different world where you've got one gynecologist for 100,000 women. That is just crazy. And I think one of the things, that I'm trying to do here is also to give context to
Mm.
menopause. And it's fascinating to be able to talk to you about the context that you have for menopause in a completely different part of the world and in just one or two or three or four parts of that different part of the world. Because I think what happens is that white people, especially, we tend to assume that our experience is universal. And we tend, and we don't look beyond our own experience and our own borders. And I think it's really important to have a bigger context, have a bigger idea of, what's going on elsewhere and what other women are struggling with.
Well, I mean, even in Africa, right? And that's why I'm very nervous to speak for Africa, but I can say a little bit, right? Think of the how widespread conflict is, right? Armed conflict. And so what falls away? Sexual reproductive health services are non-existent, for so many women, So when you add that on, I try and make sure that my work is evidence-based. And so I read broadly on different studies, and I'm sure you've seen the Vodafone study, which looked at 5 countries. It was more of a survey, than a research study, but it looked at South Africa, Spain, UK, Italy, and Germany. And looked at various aspects of how women at work, women in the workplace are impacted by menopause, looking at 5,000 women. And South Africa stood head and shoulders above the other 4 countries in terms of how many women say that they've experienced menopause symptoms. How many women say that their symptoms were severe or that they significantly impacted them at work or the way that they felt like they were perceived. How many of these women felt like they needed to hide their symptoms at work. Across all of these questions, South Africa turned, out to be, head and shoulders. And guess what? South Africa is the most progressive country on the continent when it comes to, providing, healthcare, to women. So it turns out that we are still at the bottom of the ladder, a little bit, but we're moving. It's increasingly, and I just want to apologize. I want to put out a disclaimer right now, Rachel, to people who read my material and listened to me in the first 2 months of my journey with menopause. I was like, whoa, is me. I'm going to die. I'm never going to make it. And I think that you transition, isn't it? You evolve in your engagement with the subject matter. And I think that I have, and I think that my counterparts on the continent who are talking about menopause, we are evolving. We're not just saying, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible, which it is in many different ways, but we're saying it's terrible, but there's something that you can do about it. And we talk a lot to our young women, I talk to young women a lot. If you look after yourself, you can change, you can impact the kind of experience that you will have with menopause, right? I was always slim, Rachel. And so I didn't have to diet and watch what I ate. and exercise a lot. I exercised, at university and so on. I was very sporty. But once I was an adult out of university, sometimes I'd go to the gym, but not seriously. And so when perimenopause hit, I was poorly positioned to deal with the food issues and the weight issues. My bone density suffered a lot more quickly, because I hadn't built, the strength and so on. So some of these things we're now talking about from a get ready, prepare, you can do something about it, So I like very much studies like this because they're telling us, what can happen and what we need to be doing about it. I like that whether you're in Nigeria or Ghana, you have the opportunity at some point to see a newspaper article or a news report, rarely, and with tremendous discomfort and awkwardness, but that, you will hear about menopause and that, there are podcasts. There are women who are starting to talk about it, and not just from a woes, me, point of view, but from an increasingly empowered, take back your power. You can do this. You can thrive, through menopause. It's exciting times.
This is very exciting. I'm very glad that you're doing this. Very, very good.
Well, it's actually quite humbling. In Ghana, in the article that you referred to, that you read of mine, I started working with an MP, a parliamentarian in Ghana, who was like, you're right, we need to do something about this. She went on the floor of Parliament, and somebody took a video clip of her intervention in Parliament, where she talked about menopause on the floor of Parliament. Oh man, you should have seen this. I mean, our male counterparts were squirming in their seats, but she powered through. And now there's a conversation, about health insurance, right? Because the average woman is multiplying the number of times that she's needing to go and see the doctor, and maxing out her health insurance, benefits cover, because there is nowhere on this continent that I found that health insurance is taking menopause into consideration. So we need to fix that, right? In Namibia, I'm talking to a group of health professionals who've said, you're right. We only got 2 hours worth of training of menopause, and we had no, ongoing training, on menopause. What should we do about it, right? In Botswana, there is a private sector company that says, most of our people are young. How about if we start talking about them, about menopause with them, right? In South Africa, we have a menopause society. In Uganda, we've got a menopause society. In Zimbabwe, we're starting a menopause society. And in Ghana, we're starting a menopause, society. So it's, in different countries. Here in Ethiopia, I'm talking to the Teachers Association, because the stigma is so intact that the option that availed itself and I took was, how about if we start talking to educators? We're not trying to change curriculum in schools or anything. We're just talking to educators and saying, you're the most influential people in your communities. If you get comfortable talking about menopause, let's normalize it, right? And then maybe that's a beginning. So that's the start, and the health ministry has agreed to translate, and interpret, Pause for Menopause podcast, right? In Kenya, there's a UN agency that I'm working with that, is now we're talking to staff, about menopause. And I'm so proud. I'm working with 2 UN agencies in Africa that have accepted the fact that they should talk about menopause and help their own staff with menopause before they start talking to their constituencies, about menopause. So Africa is moving. We are at the beginning of our menopause revolution, and I'm really, really proud to be associated with it.
I think you should be really proud of your impact. I think it's amazing and really is. Hats off to you. Goodness me.
Yeah, so
Because
lots of help.
but it's a big place. And but I
Yes.
think I do think just from the conversations we've had, I do think you're uniquely positioned to be able to influence lots of different countries across Africa. And I think that makes you very powerful. And we both know knowledge is power, isn't it? That's what we want, is we want to get the knowledge out so that women can, as you say, they can take back control. They can have more agency over their experience of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rachel, I really have to acknowledge the support that I have personally received from friends and counterparts, both on the continent but beyond, right? For me to even dare, to think that I could do this, I had a lot of support. And in the UK, you've got, people who've supported me in Australia, a couple of people who I know who've really mentored my walk, and to see how it can be done, how you can normalize, the conversation. So I really want to acknowledge the fact that we have a global community of people who are supporting each other, on menopause. And there's no one country, no one continent that can do this without the solidarity across countries. I've been very blessed in that my own personal walk has taken me through policy circles. So being able to talk to policymakers, parliamentarians, ministers, and I'm challenging my sisters. I've got a group of countries where the ministers of health are women, and I've challenged them that in your lifetime as a minister, you must surely impact health policy in your country to make sure that it doesn't continue to be menopause blind. So let's see how that works out. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel there is so much more we could talk about, but I know we are strapped for time. But thank you so much for joining me today, and I will just follow your progress with great interest because I think it's fantastic what you're doing. So, what do you most want to convey about menopause and older women in Africa?
Well, before I say that, thank you for your work. Your I think that we do need the rallying call that says that there is something beautiful, many beautiful things, that do happen in a woman's midlife. Let's celebrate them. Let's celebrate each other. Let's create a platform for magnifying and elevating all of those wonderful things that happen. And I think that that's really, really powerful. It is powerful. And thank you for your powerful work. Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Yeah. What do I want to convey about menopause in the life of an African woman? Was that the question?
More or less. That'll do.
Hmm. I think I would like us to be collectively indignant about the extent to which a woman's dignity is really interfered with, her aspirations, her hopes, her progression, in life, her standing, I think I want us to be collectively indignant that we still have parts of the world where women continue to be marginalized and to suffer unnecessarily, during menopause. I think that's the first thing that I would like us to do. At the same time, and by the way, I don't think that there's any tension between being powerful and asking for help. So when I'm saying let's be collectively indignant, I'm asking for help. I'm saying to my sisters and my brothers who are in other parts of the world where progress has been made, help us to highlight the fact that it's not okay for women to continue to suffer in the way that they do in Africa and in other southern contexts. So that's the first thing. And I have no problem with asking for help because I don't think that makes us as African women any less powerful. And so, and in saying that, I want to celebrate the many African women across the continent who power through menopause, without any support. And there is a hurtful side to it. There's a word in my language, shingirira, or begezela. And many African cultures, languages, have a word like that, which is almost reserved for women, that you should just persevere, just persevere. You never hear those words being said to young men or boys, but they're applied to young women in a way that says that it doesn't matter what you're feeling, it doesn't matter what you're going through, just persevere, because everybody else's comfort and needs, everybody else's needs are so important that you shouldn't focus on your own needs. And I want to bust that and say that that's not okay. We should encourage women to ask for help if they need it. So I want to put that aside and say that's not what I'm talking about. But I do want to look at women who power through in places where they've never even heard, of vaginal creams, or they've not heard of HRT, they've not heard of calcium supplements, but they're powering through and just making life happen. I want to take my hat off to those women, but also pray that help is coming. If in my lifetime I can do anything to improve the life of a brown woman on this continent so that they can thrive through menopause, I will do it. And I know many other women on this continent who are doing the same, and I salute them. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.